When maintaining your daily wellness rituals is important to you, the change in routine during the summer can feel daunting. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual, even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and much more. So you'll be fueled and ready for wherever life or your summer adventures take you. No fillers, no nonsense. Just the good stuff your body craves. Plus, it actually tastes delicious. But you can try it for yourself because the variety pack includes all 6 delicious fan favorites: chocolate, vanilla, chai, matcha, coconut acai, and strawberry. So instead of worrying about sticking to your daily ritual, simplify it with Kachava. Go to Kachava.com and use code FITNESS for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code FITNESS.
We have the tech to get food delivered in 15 minutes, but we all have horror stories about buying tickets. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage. Get amazing tickets in just a few taps. Fees are included, so what you see is what you pay. And the Game Time guarantee means authentic tickets at the best price every time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to concerts, sports, comedy, and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
Good morning, my friendly hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you, as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by our good friend, mid-major Matt Josephs. He's out there in the great state of Virginia doing the show Border to Border for ESPN Radio in Richmond. He does a great job with the Prop Queen website, the Prop Queen podcast, and so much more. We're going to chat with him about if the Atlantic 10, since he's out there in Atlantic 10 country, might be able to benefit a little bit from the NCAA tournament expanding to 76 teams. We'll talk with them about some of these teams that might need to change around their style and their tempo. I'm talking about Tennessee and Louisville mainly, but there's a few other teams out there with him being in Virginia. Obviously, the ACC has had themselves a rambunctious offseason. We're going to take a look at some of those teams that have turned over a little bit of a new leaf, how he feels about Syracuse, and all the offseason moves that they have made as well. And then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Unfortunately, really didn't have a big headline piece on Saturday, so this is going to be a very short, like 2 to 3 minute first segment because I have to hit 2 breaks, so I'm just going to be honest with you right there. But certainly, we've got ourselves a lot that is happening in college basketball. And as I've been alluding to on this podcast, I felt like May was going to be a big time for a lot of these mid-majors, and we are seeing these mid-majors get up on the board. Some of the anti-air quotes here, hate to use the word leftover guys, some of the guys that got a little bit passed up, they're signing with some very quality programs, so that's been good for them. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, and I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send these in. You've got 1 to 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, large ZM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And if we did get one headline piece from the last 24 hours in college basketball, this one happened just after I signed off on the podcast yesterday. You did see Larry Hughes II, who was really good over at CSUN, aka Cal State Northridge, was averaging about 17.5 points per game, shot 39.5% from 3 steal-and-a-half per contest. He decides that he's heading on over to Sacramento State. As we know, for Mike Bibby's squad last season, it was a little bit tumultuous, but have to feel like just the name draw in general, playing for a guy in Mike Bibby who I think that he was an all-star in the NBA level. He may not have been either that or he was just really, really good in general. I have to think that he made at least one all-star team throughout his career. I remember loving him when I was a kid myself. But that said, he's looking to be able to just revamp this program in general for Sacramento State. Has been a little bit slow going for them in the offseason. We'll see if some of these name-brand coaches are going to be able to turn it around, but I thought that was a great ad for them. They also have Arias Gary, who's heading on over from UC Riverside. Tudich, he was a nice rock solid big man over at Sonil this last season. Marcus Wilson was a little bit of a, shall we say, bench warmer for UC Davis, but should be able to give them a little bit of something in the backcourt. So I thought that was good, and we shall see if some of these guys are able to break through, because honestly, Florida A&M under Charlie Bell, they had a nice first season under him, so I thought that was solid. Now Mike Bibby looking to be able to just build a little bit of something here at Sacramento State. I think that signing is a step in the right direction for them. This podcast always goes in the right right direction when this man is aboard. Mid-Major Matt Josephs does great work, and he joins me on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast Family Podcast.
Keep your wellness routine going strong all summer. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition wherever you are, with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and more. Simplify your daily ritual. Go to kachava.com and use code FITNESS for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code FITNESS.
Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Matt Josephs aboard. He does such a great job over at the Prop Queen podcast, the Prop Queen website. List goes on and on, looking at college football, college basketball. This time of year, he does a great job on the baseball prop front. Additionally, he does a great job with the ESPN radio show out there in Richmond called Border to Border. So he does a great job following all these teams during the offseason in college basketball. And you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at a very fitting Twitter/X handle of Mid-Major Matt altogether. And Matt, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is arguably my favorite time of year because I am a nerd when it comes to this stuff and love seeing where these different players go and where they fit together.
Absolutely, and hey, there's no losing bets in May when it comes to college basketball. Might have a few on the baseball front for myself, but not any in terms of college basketball. And how do you take a look at these rosters? Because one thing that I've been noticing here in the offseason is that there's a lot of teams that are going bigger, with Tennessee being a little bit of an exception, and I'm trying to track these teams to try to see if there might be a little bit of a stylistic change, because I think that could yield a lot of value on totals early on during the season.
Well, yeah, that's for sure, but I think some of it is there is low practices and stuff in this part of the year before we kind of get hot and heavy later on in the year. So I don't know how much information we get now. It's mostly just looking at projections, looking at how players seem to fit what they did at their old school and take a look at what they do at the new school. How many of these players are back from the previous year with the same school, like a UVA that brought back almost everybody that was important from the team last year. So certainly they will be a team that probably will be close to pretty much the same. So I think this is just kind of getting your own information for now until we start having media days and a lot more practices under our belts.
Yep, absolutely. That is going to be so key. And you're a man that's out there in the state of Virginia, so obviously you have your finger on the pulse of the ACC A10. A little bit of Sun Belt out there as well, which have a few developments out there with Louisiana Tech joining that conference as well, so it's never ending there. But how do you take a look at what we've seen in the ACC in the offseason? Because I thought that they had a nice offseason last year, and I don't think that they're back to being on the level of like the SEC, the Big Ten, or anything like that. But I feel like a lot of, especially the lesser teams out there in the ACC, have really gone out there and had themselves some nice off seasons.
I think some people are going to be there's going to be some question marks. I look at a Virginia Tech who lost a lot, but was able to bring back a Hansberry, bring back a Tyler Johnson, bring back another player from the roster last year, and they've basically reloaded once again. And I use the term reloaded in that they brought back a lot of new players on their roster, and there's some intriguing, pieces there that I would love to see how they kind of fit. My alma mater, Syracuse, of course, who has not added a Power 4 player transfer-wise, but basically is adding a bunch of new players, some Siena kids to go along with the new head coach. I think both of those teams have opportunities to surprise, but I also think they have opportunities to potentially continue to fall down in the standings. It's just how will they look early on in practice and how will they look early on in the season?
Yep, it certainly is going to be key. And we've seen some coaching moves once again out there in the ACC. I think that it's fair to say I don't think that NC State is going to be quite back to where they were hoping to be at this time last year, because you lose Will Wade, and now you're bringing a guy who's got familiarity with the program at Justin Gainey. But I really do think that the Jerry McNamara hire was a very solid one for Syracuse. I think that you'd probably agree with me. Probably going to take a little bit of time, but I love this move for Syracuse. And if nothing else, it just feels like the fan base and the boosters are a little bit more fired up and a little bit more willing to spend for this team.
So I really think there are two groups when it comes to the GMAC hire. There are the old school people who saw what he did when he was a player, and they're like, oh my goodness, this is great. We're bringing back an alum. We're bringing back a legend, and now there's going to be some excitement. And then there's people like me who are like, I really wish we would have gone away from the Boeheim tree. I wish we would have gone and gotten somebody else that was outside the program. I understand familiarity is great to have, but let's say McNamara struggles a little bit. Are you going to be able to get away from him early enough and make another change, or are you going to let him stay a little longer because of what he did, because he won a national championship? So I'm a little skeptical. I think I love what he did at Siena, and obviously if he had a bench, he might have beaten Duke in that first round game in the NCAA tournament. But at first, I was not a huge fan of this hire because I was just ready to get away from the Boeheim tree and start fresh.
Yep, I do think that that's very fair as well, because we saw what happened the last few years with Autry. That was not necessarily amazing, to say the least, but certainly with McNamara being able to push a one seed like Duke, I think that that's going to be nice and should be able to get some of those rivalries stirred up a little bit as well, which we always love to see, as we do have our good friend Matt Josephs, aka Mid-Major Matt, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly there have been a lot of moves that have been made in the offseason, but one of the biggest, shall we say, movers here in the offseason, I feel like has been Louisville. When you bring in Flory Badunga along Jackson Shellset, that's big, along with a guy like an Alvaro Falgarius. They've added a few international men of mystery here over the last few days as well. And how do you take a look at a Louisville team that last year they were very much built around three-point shooting? And I spoke about it at the top, perhaps looking at teams that might have a little bit of stylistic change. And I don't think that they're going to completely abandon the system that they've got right now, but it does feel like Louisville's going to be playing a little bit differently than they did a season ago.
Well, and I think that's on the coach, too. I mean, if you're going to bring in a different roster than you're used to, you have to be able to adapt and not run the same things necessarily. I really like the Deshane Montgomery addition. You know, watching him at Dayton, he's a really good player, a really good guard. I think he's going to add a lot to Louisville. So I think he's kind of a guy who doesn't have the name of a Shellstad and a Badunga, but I think Deshane Montgomery is going to be a very underrated addition for that team. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we hear out of practice and what we hear from the head coach, you know, at ACC Media Day and for basketball. So this is one of those teams that, as you said, we could potentially find some value if the books are pricing them like a team that's going to shoot a lot of threes, and they're not a team that shoots a lot of threes. That's the important part of reading the press clippings and reading what the coaches say, especially in the offseason.
Yep, I do think so as well, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with those summer practices, what have you, but certainly they've been able to add a lot here in the offseason in terms of big men, and I think that that's going to be very beneficial for them moving forward. And I do think that the ACC in general has had a few interesting moves. And how about this one as well? Because I don't think that this is going to be a team that makes the NCAA tournament. I don't think that this is going to be a team that's going to be amazing, but I feel like something that we've talked about in the past is a lot of the ACC teams that are on the bubble trying to be able to get in the NCAA tournament, they get hurt by the losses to, say, a Georgia Tech, say, a Boston College. And those are two teams that hired on coaches in the offseason, albeit they're bringing in mostly mid-major players, but it feels like Boston College and Georgia Tech are going to be a little bit more respectable. And if they could get to a level to where a loss against one of those two teams doesn't completely kill your resume, I think that that's a good thing for the ACC as a whole.
Yeah, bringing over Valdez from Troy is going to be nice for Georgia Tech. I think he was a really good player at Troy. And I think that, as you said, like, these are not headliner moves, but they are at least respectable moves, and they're going to make the program a little bit better. And look, I've always said, you know, Boston College, if you're not focused when you head to that building, because it's a different kind of arena, there's not a ton of fans. The fans that are there are and can be loud. Like, I think Boston College is the type of team that can get a few upset wins at home, and they're getting better players. And, you know, we'll see what happens with, you know, the head coach and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's very important for these conferences, especially like the ACC, to have their bottom at least move up. They're still going to be a bottom, but if they're a better bottom and they're not in the 250, 260s in terms of the net, that's going to be a little bit better for the conference as a whole.
Yep, I'm right there with you. They just need those to not be like absolute landmine quad three, quad four losses if they can just get back to respectability, which I think that they have taken steps in the right direction to be able to do so. I think that that's going to be massive as we do have our good friend Mid-Major Matt joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Matt, when it comes to the A10, I wouldn't say that there's been a ton of sizzle here in the offseason, but we have seen quite a few teams retain a lot of their own. Like St. Louis obviously can't bring back Robbie Outlaw because he's out of eligibility, but they inked a lot of that previous roster from last season when they made the NCAA tournament. VCU has quite a bit of retention as well. And how have you taken a look at what we've seen here in the A10 in the offseason? Because in a day and age where we see so many guys saying the transfer portal, what have you, I think that their retention, especially for being a non-Power 5 conference, has been quite respectable and quite good.
Yeah, and Fordham being able to bring some of those guys back speaks to the head coach because he's a guy that I really liked in the offseason, loved what he did in his previous stops. I think that he's going to do some good things at Fordham, and it's a school that who knows how much NIL money they have and be able to keep some of their better players. I think that's fantastic. But to me, this conference right now is VCU and everybody else. I mean, when you're able to retain almost everybody that you could, the Terrence Hill loss is a huge loss, but like this is what college athletics are. You have a really good game in the NCAA tournament, especially against a North Carolina. Everybody's going to be paying attention, and then, he's not going to be able to stay. But when you bring in a Blake Harper, and if you bring in a guy who is slightly better than the Creighton Blake Harper and even slightly worse than the Howard Blake Harper, I think he's going to be huge in that conference. I really like him. I think that he's a guy that's going to be excited in his new area and be excited to kind of remind people how good he was. Maybe he made too large of a jump going from Howard to Creighton. Stepping back to the Atlantic 10, I think is going to be great. I think he's going to be a fantastic player. And I'll say this. I think if he starts especially, he could be a very sleeper candidate for A10 Player of the Year, especially preseason, because I just think he's that good. And I think in this conference, he has an opportunity to be so much better.
Yep, and Phil Martelli Jr., he obviously plays a exciting style of basketball. Maybe in terms of possessions per game, it was a little bit down this past year as compared to Bryant, but that's because you've got so many slower teams out there in the Atlantic 10. And I think that it is well said by you because it is VCU and everyone else in that conference. But how do you take a look at a team like a Dayton, who prior to VCU having their absolute dominance over the last few years, we remember Dayton, they were the team that probably lost the most with that COVID 2020 season because they were poised to be making a big run with Obi Toppin and company, and they had that 1 year where they tried to bring in Zed Key, Pasha Alexander. It didn't work out, and I feel like they've really learned from that, and maybe they're not bringing in the big headliner guys or anything like that, but some like a Jalen Haynes, some like a Zayd Lowry from Marquette, I feel like they've done a great job of revamping that roster as well.
Yeah, and certainly Anthony Grant is a very good coach despite what Dayton fans think, and certainly, there was a time last year when Dayton was struggling and they wanted him to go, and he fixed things, and that team had a really good season the rest of the way. Granted, it didn't end in the NCAA tournament, but I think Anthony Grant's a very good coach. You said it. I mean, the guys that they brought over, not exactly headliners, but when you're able to get a transfer from Cincinnati, a transfer from Marquette, a transfer from Ole Miss, even if you are not getting the best players from those teams, still those teams recruited these kids. And so certainly they saw something. And so you just have to hope that they fit in your system. They fit on your roster. You hope that, UD Arena continues to be a very tough place to play. We know they're going to get good non-conference games because Dayton somehow gets really good non-conference opponents for an Atlantic 10 team. So I think Dayton's a sleeper. They still have some work to do, I think, and they're not with St. Louis or VCU yet, but I definitely think Dayton could be a factor come February or March.
And this is a little bit more of a broad brush question because, as we know, the NCAA tournament, it's going from 68 teams to 76 teams, and we know that the main crux of it is to help out these power conference teams and help their insert 8 and 12 team here in your favorite power conference be able to get into the NCAA tournament. But do you think that perhaps the Atlantic 10 could be one of the beneficiaries? Because we've seen over the last few years, it's been a little bit of a struggle for them to get two teams into the NCAA tournament because it always feels like they got one or two teams right there on the cut line. And I do think that they actually could be one of the conferences that might benefit just a little bit from realignment and the expansion.
I'd like to think they will be, but I can't. As you just said, we're going to get a team with a losing record. We're going to get an 18 and 17 team in there, and it's not going to be the Atlantic 10. It's not going to be the Missouri Valley. I'd like to think that this will open up more spots, but I just feel like I'm trying to be realistic here and just unfortunately realize, look, I don't want an NCAA tournament expansion, but I always said if we were going to expand, let's turn Dayton into a mid-major versus a major for all the 11, 12s, and 13s. And of course, we could get that, but I don't think that's what we will will. I do laugh when the conference commissioners of like the SoCon and the CAA come out and say, oh yeah, this means more opportunities for us, even though they realize like that's actually not why they're doing it. We don't need expansion, and I don't know necessarily if the Atlantic 10 is going to benefit. I hope they do. I hope they get 2 or 3 teams in now, but I just don't think that'll be the case.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a little bit tough. Perhaps we do get a little bit of a benefit and a little bit of a boost there, but I do agree with you. It's been very unfortunate what we've seen here over the last few seasons in terms of getting the mid-major teams into the field. And we've talked a little ACC, we've talked a little A10. Is there just a team or two in general? It can be from those conferences, it can be from outside those conferences. It's Steelers' choice here that you've just been very intrigued by their offseason. Maybe it's a coach that you like, maybe it's just a transfer haul that you've been liking, but just a team or two that you're right now keeping your eye on, and you feel like they've had an interesting offseason.
Well, I think GW is a team that we've talked about on your podcast a lot, how I was a huge fan of GW last year. I love the roster. And they lost everybody. And I think they brought in some intriguing players. Like, I think that there's an opportunity for them to potentially be as good or a little bit lesser, like in that tier 2 of the Atlantic 10. I think GW bringing in some of the guys that they did, I think that's a really interesting team to watch and see what Chris Caputo can do. Georgia transfer, a Notre Dame transfer. You know, there's several others. NC State, who played at Houston and Arsenault. I think George Washington's a team to watch. And then I guess I'll promote my Zag. You know, when you're Mark Few and you're up in Spokane and you're changing conferences, when he's able to bring in the freshmen that he has, bring in the Houston transfer that he does. I know there's still some work to do up in Gonzaga, and I know that Mark Few will do that. But like, and Diop as well. Like, I think Gonzaga's got a roster here. Like, I think people forget, if Braden Huff doesn't get hurt, that Gonzaga team goes a lot further in the NCAA tournament. He was having an all-time epic year, and so he's going to be back next year. And you have Saint Superi, and you have some of these other guys who, you know, got some opportunities to play last year. I really feel like Gonzaga once again next year with the new conference is going to be one of those under-talked about teams, because the Dukes and the North Carolinas and the UConns and all these other teams the Blue Bloods are going to be good once again, which I think is ultimately good for Gonzaga because they're at their best when people do not talk about them.
Yeah, it was looking like it was going to be a really good year for Gonzaga. They obviously take that big loss to Michigan, but everyone was losing to Michigan at that time of the year in very, very convincing fashion. And then Braden Huff goes down and everything goes down the toilet bowl for them. So bringing him back, you mentioned Diop. I do like what they've done here. And what I always love is getting you aboard on this podcast, Matt, because you do such a great job looking at college basketball, do a great job on the football front, you do a great job with baseball, and so much more. So love the good people at home. Know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, at Mid-Major Matt on Twitter. I post all my plays, tracked on the Action Network app, and certainly, you know, we're in the thick of the baseball season for now, and then, you know, college football, there's win totals out, so I'm starting to do my research a little bit, seeing if there's any value before practices fire up once again. Of course, the NFL schedule is coming out soon, so certainly taking a look at those win totals when they come out around that time, so there's a lot to get into, but as always, follow me on Twitter at Mid-Major Matt, and ask me any questions that you want, because we all have one goal. We all want to beat the books.
Absolutely. And Matt, he's doing such an amazing job looking on so many different fronts and so many different markets to be able to find value. And every single time he joins me on such great insight. So big thanks to Matt for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. Coming next, I give you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball in the last 24 hours. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Mid-Major Matt Josephs. He does great work over at ESPN Radio in Richmond, the Prop Queen website, and so much more. Every single time he joins me, he lends amazing insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Matt for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Have to figure that this is a little bit of an insurance policy here for UConn. Jay Nash, he was a solid point guard last season over at Jacksonville State. 5 points, 4 assists per game, a little bit more of a pass first guy. He heads on over to UConn. I compared this to the NBA when you have a ring chaser. I do feel like Jim Nash is very much that here in this sort of a circumstance, a career 27.5% three-point shooter, like a part-time starter last year over at Jacksonville State. And for UConn, they can use a little bit of an insurance policy because Solo Ball, he is going to be out for the season, and you'd rather be filling out that like 11th or 12th roster spot with a guy like a Nash rather than some sort of walk-on that you don't know. But yeah, if Nash is seeing getting meaningful minutes for UConn. Something that's went horribly wrong for UConn. You just take a look at what they've been able to do here in the offseason, maintaining the likes of Braden Mullins and much of that roster from a season ago. They made some really nice adds in the portal as well. You bring in a former top 30 recruit in Nicolas Kamena, Najai Hines, who comes over from Seton. I really love what they've been able to do here in the offseason, and now this is just like the cherry on top to make sure that absolutely nothing goes wrong here this season for them. Frank Kapadog, he has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Kentucky. This is going to be year number 7 of eligibility. He does need a waiver to be able to play. A lot of people do think that he is going to be able to get that waiver, but this is a guy that if he can stay healthy, he's going to be able to give you a little bit of something. 6 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to stretch a floor, but throughout his career, typically averages like a block and a half per contest. Last year, he was able to supply Washington with 2 blocks per game. So again, a solid piece here for Kentucky. Who's going to be that star guy? It feels like they're holding out for Milan Mimosilovic, who was over at Iowa State. He was a nice 3-point shooter, because that's really the element that's missing. For Kentucky, you don't necessarily have that guy that's able to pop it and lock it from 3-point range. Zoom Diallo is certainly not going to be that. You're probably not going to be able to get that as well out of Alex Wilkins. Sure, Jerome Morton was a 40% 3-point shooter over at Washington State, but he's like the number 4 scorer for Washington State. What are we doing here? So for Kentucky, been a slow go of it here in the offseason. We shall see what we're going to be doing, but that said, it is a nice ad for them here. You've got Kylan Housey. He was over at Louisiana Tech last season. He's decided that he's going to be heading on over to Old Dominion, was a part of a defense-oriented system, and I thought Old Dominion was going to play much better defense than they did a season ago. He was only averaging about 2.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game, but should be able to give a little bit more depth down low after. Again, it was just a really disappointing year for them. Now, Old Dominion, they've only had 2 ads, but I really like them. Boo Boo Benjamin was a really good double-figure scorer over at Tarleton State 2 seasons ago. I think he's going to be able to step in there, and he's going to be able to give you quite a bit. And Adante Holloman, he was a guy that was supposed to go to Arizona State last season, ended up redshirting. Last we saw him over at Georgia Southern, he was averaging 17 points per game, shot about 38.5% from 3-point range. The ads that Old Dominion have had are great. They're going to need to add a little bit more, in my opinion. I know that they're going a little bit more to the non-D1 ranks as well, but I do like this ad for them. It's a little bit of depth for them down low, and they do need a little bit more rough and tumble, in my opinion, because last year they were just lacking that. Brandon Lee was over at Illinois last season. He was giving the team right around about 2 points per contest, and he has decided that he's going to James Madison. So another ad out there in the Sun Belt, and for James Madison, it's a bunch that I feel like they just need to put a little bit more pressure on the ball than they did the last few seasons. That he comes over from a program that out of 365 Division I teams, they were 365th in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, but still a guy that was relatively solidly recruited. I do think that James Madison has done a nice job in terms of being able to balance gambles and being able to get some known commodities. Like Gage Lattimore was really good over at NC Central last season. Jacob Ogret, I know that Gardner Webb was terrible last season, but he's going to be a good, nice rebounder for them. Kayvon Riley was injured last season, but he's a good 3-point shooter. Garrett Sandra, KJ Wyndham coming over from Power Conference schools. That's solid, but for James Madison, what really makes his Preston Spradlin system work is good defense. I do think that Lee is going to be able to bring that to the table. Again, don't think that he's going to generate any turnovers or anything like that, but I do think that this is a solid ad for them. Jacob Barnaby, he was over at UNLV, and he has decided that he's going to Providence. Again, I think that this is an insurance policy for Providence because they've had themselves an amazing offseason. I really like what Brian Hodgson has built over here for Barnaby. 5.5 points, 5 rebounds per game, had a little bit of recruitment coming out of high school. Not a guy that's really going to be stretching the floor, and you just look at who Providence has added. Who are you going to be starting him over? Because for Providence, it feels like they become Noah's Ark. They've got 2 of everything as of right now. They've been able to do a nice job in terms of muscling up down low because you bring in Arrington Page, who was over at Northwestern last season. You've got Samson Allerton, who was over at Yale. He saw some meaningful minutes over there. They bring in the Mac attack, Malik Mack, in terms of the backcourt. On over from Georgetown, Ryan Sable was a nice go-to scorer over at Buffalo. Devin Vanderpool was Mr. Do-It-All over at Florida Atlantic. They were a little bit thin down low, so he's going to be able to give them some rotational depth. But again, I do think that this is more of an insurance ad for them, and we are seeing this now that a lot of teams, they only have 2, maybe 3 roster spots remaining, and teams that have more roster spots remaining, well, they are trying to sign guys very, very quickly, and you're seeing that right now with regards to a team like Chicago State. They are bringing in Amari Caraway, who was over at Charleston Southern last season, and he was a solid scorer over at Charleston Southern last year, 6.5 points per game. Now, Charleston Southern was not a team that generated any turnovers whatsoever, and Chicago State was actually a pretty solid team in terms of generating turnovers. They were absolutely absolutely terrible down low, so they are going to need to add some depth. And for Chicago State, it's been a very slow build for them in terms of transfer portal. They just have not been able to add too much. They're going to need to add some size, but get a guy that was shooting about 33% from three-point range. This is a talented player for Chicago State standards, but again, would like to see them be able to address what they need a little bit more down low as well. You've got Joshua Eli, he was over at Army this last season, 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. He heads on over to Western Michigan. Again, for Western Michigan, this is an insurance policy for Khalil Fennell, who was so good over at UT Rio Grande Valley. He's brought over a lot of his own to be able to help fill out this roster. You bring in Tanner Hayhurst earlier in the week from Southern Utah, Augustus Claudulis, double-figure score from VMI 2 years ago, Rob Lee. Like, where are the minutes going to be coming from for this poor young man? But that said, it is going to be able to give this team a little bit more depth, and at 6'6", 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, he helps fill out the roster. Harrison Reed, he was over at Incarnate Word. He was a solid player this past season as he was able to average 5 points per game, was really a one-trick pony sort of guy. This guy shot 53.2% from three-point range, shot better from three-point range than he did from two-point range. He really didn't do a lot of defending. He didn't do any sort of facilitation whatsoever, but he shot 53% from three-point range, and he has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Buffalo. And for Buffalo, this very much fits their system. They were a great offensive team last year and really didn't provide too much defense, so you're going to need to work on that a little bit. And for Buffalo, this was a team that was not necessarily the world's greatest on the glass, so there's that aspect of things. But you're looking for a guy that fits the system. This very much helps out with that. Mikal Tenai, who comes over from Richmond, is another good three-point shooter. They bolstered that defense with bringing in Drew Steffe, who comes over from Southern Illinois, and then they bring over a pair of guys from Tennessee State. Jalen Petrie, he was one of the top rebounders for them. Antonio Lorick, the third, is going to be coming in. You bring in J.J. Frakes, who is a 6'5", do-it-all sort of player over at Oregon as well. And I really like what Buffalo has done here in the offseason. Now you just add in there a weapon that you can bring in off the bench, give you some instant scoring. So I love this move for them. I like this move as well. You've got Christian Jones, who was over at Siena this last season. He was sort of lost in the shadow of a lot of the other guys in the backcourt. He was only averaging about 4 points per game, but he has decided that he is going to be going to UMass Lowell. UMass Lowell is one of those teams that has really been just ravaging the transfer portal, and of all teams, NJIT has had themselves a relatively nice offseason. I like what Vermont has done, so they've been sort of falling behind the Joneses out there in the America East, but this one gets them on the board. Really, the only other guy that they had added prior to this is Jaden Harris, who was a bit of a bench warmer over at Eastern Kentucky, but still, I look at this ad and I do think that it's going to be able to give them a bit of something. A guy that had a little bit of fanfare coming out of the great state of Texas, shot 95% the free throw line, 33% from three-point, should be a little bit more of a primary ball handler for a UMass Lowell team that had a very difficult time taking care of the ball, so should be able to help out there. And then NJIT, they do lose someone in Ari Fulton. Last season, 11 points, 6 boards per contest, and he heads on over to St. Bonaventure. Just been a little bit underwhelming for St. Bonaventure over the last few years. As we know, they replaced Dr. Schmidt in the offseason. I know that some of the boosters apparently are not necessarily fond of what Woj has been doing over there. We shall see how that's going to be going moving forward. They went the non-D1 route, bringing in Mike McDonald, who was just an absolute dominator when he was out there at Daemen University. He's brought a lot of the guys that he was coaching at the D2 ranks over, so you're going to notice St. Bonaventure not bringing in a lot of Division I transfers right now. He should be able to help out down low, but he's bringing over a lot of the guards that was a part of a Daemen College team that was really, really explosive on offense, really just exploded from three-point range. So now they've got a little bit of rebounding to go with that in Fulton, and then you're going to be getting a little bit of something if you're Tulsa from Kobe Williams. He is going to be transferring on over from Missouri State, so he's staying sort of in the middle part of the country. And last season, 14.5 points, 2.5 boards. Missouri State was not a good three-point shooting team. He was one of the lone guys that was able to bomb it from three-point, shot about 37% from three-point. He very much fits the Tulsa style. It was a little bit slow going for Tulsa in the transfer portal in the first few weeks, but they've gotten on the board with, in my opinion, some really nice ads. Macomb Emery, he's a guy that comes over from Delaware that I think fits the system. They bolster what they've got down low. Chris Lufay, who's a 6'11" big man that comes over from Middle Tennessee. Brent Moss was one of the few respectable players over at UTSA. Meet the Roadrunners. Mike Williams was able to see some nice minutes over at Seton. I don't think that this is going to be quite the same three-point shooting team that they were a season ago, because you do lose someone like an Adi Papula, who was really good for you. Obviously, you had all those guys like David Green and company, but this is going to be a team that I think is going to be better defensively defensively. I think that they're going to be stronger on the glass, and I think that Williams is going to be able to give you that 3-point shooting and some good versatility. So I absolutely love this ad for them. You got a Division II ad here in Tamaja Boozy. Hopefully I got that correct. He's going to be adding on over to Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne has been one of those teams that has just absolutely hit on these guys that come on over from the non-Division I ranks. He was averaging about 18.5 points, 6.5 boards, and it's been a slow off-season year for Fort Wayne. They're really not adding anyone from the Division I ranks, but the way that they've been able to do a great job in terms of looking at these non-D1 guys has been absolutely superb. We've seen it time and time again. You go back a few seasons ago, and I recognize that I have to go to my Wisconsin roots here because there's only one non-Division I university out there in the great state of Wisconsin, and that would be UW Parkside. And when they brought in Rasheed Bello, he was really able to elevate them a few seasons ago. So they've done a good job in terms of being able to find some, shall we say, value and being able to find some good players there. So I think that this could be another one of them. Najimy George, he was a part of the newest Division I team in New Haven last season. Solid player, 11.5 points, just under 2 assists per game. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Sam Amford. Now he's going to need to play at a little bit of a quicker style. New Haven was one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball, and just because New Haven had absolutely no size whatsoever, he was playing out of position a lot. So I do think that his numbers can be a little bit elevated here in the Samford system. I really am a believer in what Lenny Acuff is doing over at Samford. They were a nice, efficient team down low. They didn't necessarily have the world's greatest three-point shooting, but you're bringing Ty Davis now from Creighton. You're bringing George, who I mentioned before. Wynn Miller from Belmont, I think, has a lot of upside. Just couldn't see a lot of minutes in the shadow of so many of those guys over there. And for George, last year he only shot about 28% from three-point range, but is a nice, rock-solid defender at 6'4" that can guard multiple positions. And Samford, they were a little bit lackluster in terms of guarding the three-point line. He should be able to do a good job in terms of helping out there. Anthony Endo, he last season was over at Georgia State, was averaging about 5 points, 5 rebounds per game. He's heading on over to Kennesaw State. We give our to Lane Kiffin. Go Owls. And for Kennesaw State, they do lose quite a bit from that NCAA tournament team from a season ago, most notably the point guard in RJ Johnson, but they still have a lot of depth in terms of low post play, even with losing Franquan Sherman as well. And they're just reloading with a bunch of guys that are going to be out at the boards. We've got Chris Parker, a 6'9" big man, coming over from Central Florida. Avery Thomas, the second. He's only 6'7", but was a nice rebounder over at Louisiana Tech. CJ Beaumont was at 6'8", a part of a Sam Houston State team where the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Now Endo not going to be stretching the floor and really popping it from three-point range or anything like that. Shot about 24% from three, but a really good defender. And for Kennesaw State, they like to play fast and sort of like the 40 minutes of HE double hockey stick style like you saw over at Arkansas many, many years ago. And he's going to be able to fit that system really well. And hopefully fitting your system is listening to this podcast every single day to be enlightened on what we're seeing in college basketball. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Junit_81. Keep in mind, letters AM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. A big thanks once again to our good friend Matt Joseph, aka Major Matt, for joining me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day with picks and analysis on every game every day once we get in season. Here in the off season, looking at all the news and notes we're getting in. Once these rosters become a little bit more crystallized, you're going to get a conference preview for all 32 conferences. So appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.